Before I move on, I just want to say that a significant achievement of this conference will be its impact in continuing to raise awareness of the profoundly important work that IANDS undertakes, and that in addition to setting, once again, a very public agenda for showcasing otherworldly experiences and phenomena, that it also recognises the important contribution of social science research in this work and to this work. And I remember reading, I was thinking about this the other day actually, I remember reading some time ago that survival research and consciousness studies are the new frontier of scientific inquiry, and I believe this conference and your attendance certainly attests to that. I've titled my presentation Uneasy Bedfellows, After-Death Contact and the Influence of Senses. And the reason I've done that is because I wanted to highlight some of the interdisciplinary tensions that can swirl around these experiences. And that can be quite polarizing, as anyone who has experienced that knows all too well. And you can see on the slide that I've included a quote from the wonderful Emerson from his work titled The Oversoul, which is a beautiful, beautiful book. So I'll just start from this screen, from where Jan just let me know that there was a problem. So as you can see, I've included a quote on the screen from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I think I was saying the reason that I included this quote was because it plays into the essence of my research, and in particular the findings, which I like to think offer people an invitation to consider life and their way of being in the world from a transpersonal or a spiritual perspective. And before I actually talk about our program and our objectives today, I'd like to do something first. In Australia, it's our custom when giving a presentation to acknowledge country and Indigenous and ancestral ties to lineage. So I would like to do that now. So my presentation is coming to you today from the land of the Darug people, of the Darug nation, and I acknowledge their ancestors who have been the traditional owners and custodians of their country for thousands of years, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, to those who are emerging, and to any who may be joining with us today. I also want to acknowledge that this presentation is being watched by people who are also residing on the lands of First Nations people, and I pay my respects to the people of those lands as I do to their elders who are past, present, and emerging. And finally, I acknowledge and pay my respects to all ancestors of all tribes, of all nations, of all peoples. Our ancestors live within us, and we are very much the repository of their hopes and their dreams and their wishes as much as we are our own. So our program consists of a speaker bio. So I'll talk a little bit about myself. I will talk a little bit about the influences and events which have shaped me and have shaped how I live in the world. Now, I feel that many of you will probably be quite familiar with after-death contact. However, I'm talking about after-death contact as it occurs within a context of bereavement. I will deconstruct the study. We'll look at the research design, the methodology, and I will share with you some of the stories that were shared with me. Then we'll look at what I found out, and then we'll close with Q&A. Now, there are quite a few objectives here. And of course, there are, sub-objectives under those main objectives. But I think if you walk away from this session feeling inspired, feeling encouraged to do your own research, or knowing that what you have perhaps experienced yourself is real, or feeling that you are not alone, then as far as I'm concerned, those objectives on the screen have been met. So a little bit about me. I think the first thing I'd like to share with you all is my spiritual belief system, because that underpins everything that I do, and it is the lens through which I look out to see and experience the world. Life has taught me that we are spiritual beings in a physical or material body, and that death as an event in our lives is the putting off of that body, which then allows us to live as spiritual beings in the spiritual universe. So I grew up in Papua New Guinea. I was born in Australia, but I spent my childhood in Papua New Guinea, and living, within a very rich and diverse culture. And it was there as a small child that I was first introduced to what I term otherworldly phenomena, but also importantly to the understanding that I was aware of things and was experiencing things that were beyond the perception of my 5 physical senses. So for example, I didn't see God as I saw the natural, world around me, but I had mystical experiences where the presence of the divine was made known. And anyone who has had, these sorts of experiences, and lots of people have, they're very common. Anyone who has had these experiences doesn't just believe, they know in the depths of their being that what they have experienced is real, and nothing can ever dispute that. So as I said, I experienced a diverse range of phenomena, which I still do. They've been my constant companion through my life, and all of these are recorded in a autobiographical chapter, which is in thesis, because that was part of the research design. And if anyone is interested, the thesis is available for download from the University of Sydney Library. It's a public document, so it is available to everyone. I always felt like I was reaching toward something which was just in front of me, and I always felt discontent, because I knew there was more to life and I knew there was more to me, but nobody could tell me what that was. My family and I came back to Australia when I was 11, and as I grew older, I became more and more discontent. And I knew that I was on a journey, and I knew that I was on that journey alone. Now, when I was 20, I entered a Sufi school where I was introduced to Gurdjieff's work on the Fourth Way, and also to Dr. Philip Grove's work on Beyond the Fourth Way. And I was also introduced to the writings of other Fourth Way writers, such as Ouspensky, John Bennett, Maurice Nicoll, Margaret Anderson, Catherine Holm, and also the incredible work of Emanuel Swedenborg. I went to university, I completed several degrees, I've taught in academia, I've been published, and very excitingly, I have just finished a social work degree. I'm very interested in counselling around these experiences, and I'm hoping to work in a clinical role so I can actually pursue this, and also work my way back to academia. Now, while I've always lived with otherworldly phenomena, it was my husband's death and my subsequent after-death contact with him, which catapulted me basically into the position in which you now see me. So how do we define after-death contact? Well, we know how it manifests in people's lives, and I'll talk about that a little later. But how do we begin to make sense of it? In a step toward that, and I have thought a lot about this. I mean, it seems to me that after-death contact is an event where material and non-material reality overlap or intersect. And when that occurs, to me, it seems like a portal or a doorway opens, and somehow material and non-material can come together and can interact. Now, the players in this drama are human beings. They're us, the embodied, and they are the disembodied, those who have died and who are living their lives as spiritual beings. So what can people experience? Well, again, we know from lived experience and also from what has been widely reported in the literature that after-death contact can manifest in multiple ways, especially during bereavement. For example, can feel as though you're being watched, to what we term a full-blown sensory experience, where you may physically see the person, you may hear them, you may smell something associated with them, or you may be touched by them. And now the other aspect to this phenomena is that it is always the disembodied or the deceased who initiate the contact. It is always them reaching out to us. Now, I've listed some types of after-death contact, and my research, I have another slide following this, which has some more experiences, but my research definitely indicates that some people will experience just one type of after-death contact. Some people will experience the same type of contact, but maybe several times. Some people will experience several different types of contact experiences several times. Everyone in the study experienced after-death contact in some way, shape, or form, either once or multiple times. So within a bereavement context, these experiences are completely unexpected, and because they're so unexpected, they can be quite startling. Not everyone experiences this. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't either, and they do tend to occur quite soon after our loved one has passed, and there's generally, you know, a tapering off over time. They're very spontaneous. They can occur at any time, at any place, which can also make them quite startling. And they always leave the feeling, or I beg your pardon, they always leave the individual with the feeling that they have tangibly experienced the presence of the person who has died. Now, on this slide, you can see two quotes from Nicola Tesla, who was a brilliant electrical engineer. Now, I've included these quotes not to malign him in any way, but to illustrate how a strictly mechanistic and, to me, a somewhat lifeless view of the individual and the universe can contrast so sharply with what otherworldly phenomena is inviting us to consider. Tesla used the word automatons. Are we automatons? You know, I ask myself that. Are we automatons? I don't think we are. Or are we dynamic bundles of possibilities capable of spiritual growth and change and transformation? Do we live in a mechanistic universe, or in one which is constantly changing and evolving. Is reality what we think it is, or is it something else? Let's see what the research says. So all research seeks to answer a question. Well, some research studies may have several questions. My question that I was asking, you can see on the slide, I didn't just want to understand the nature of after-death contact. I wanted to understand its meaning. I wanted to understand what its purpose was. I don't believe that anything exists unless it has a use. So I ask, what is the use of this phenomena? Why does it occur? Why did I do this research? Why did I do this study? Well, I've listed some of the reasons, some of the drivers for why I did this research. I mean, I could say that I wanted to challenge social norms. Well, obviously I did. That I wanted to confront stereotypes about grief and grieving, which obviously I did. And of course, the research does that. But I think I really wanted to raise awareness of this phenomena, and that I wanted to normalize these experiences. And I wanted to let people know that they weren't alone. And of course, I'm passionate, as anyone who is watching this can see. I am passionate about this aspect of life. So a little bit about the design and methodology. My research was qualitative, and the reason I chose to do qualitative research was because I wanted to hear people's voices. I wanted to understand the values and meanings of what they had experienced through their eyes. I wanted to look out at this phenomena from within them. Carl Jung said that every human being at core has a unique story, and that to grow one's greatest meaning is to grow one's story. One of the findings of the study was that for everyone who participated in it, including myself, realized that after-death contact becomes an internal narrative. So it becomes part of the story of not just who we are, but of what we are and of how we live, because it changes us from the inside out. And what happens is that a shift occurs and we see and experience life from a different perspective. I like to think that we become more human, but that's just me. So I chose a heuristic research design, which is one of the transpersonal methodologies identified by Browd and Anderson. It was developed by Mastakis when he was completing his own research study on loneliness in the 1990s, I think, thereabouts. So within this design, the researcher has to have experienced what they are researching. So in my case, in order to even do this research, I had to have had experienced after-death contact, which I did. I had multiple experiences, very diverse experiences with my husband who had died. The key concepts are identifying with the focus of inquiry. I've just mentioned that. Self-dialogue, tacit knowing, intuition, indwelling, internal frame of reference. There are a lot of dimensions. It's a very robust research process, and it is not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you that. The other reason why I chose this is because it emphasizes plurality of voice. So by that I mean the participants, normally studies will make use of or employ participants to provide information, but it's very different in heuristic research because the participants actually become co-researchers, and that's it's a very significant power dynamic that actually becomes equalized, although some would argue around that, but all of us were doing this research together. So there is a sense of ownership and custodianship that we all shared. And I talked about that during the interviews that I had with all of the co-researchers. So this slide tells us a little bit about the co-researchers. I can tell you that people came from all walks of life. Everybody was 18 years of age and older. Ages ranged from early 20s to late 60s. Everybody had experienced after-death contact. There were 7 men and there were 14 women who participated in the study, and people they had lost included partners, spouses, grandparents, grandchildren. The interviews, which were fascinating, heart-wrenching, inspiring, ranged in length from 1 to 3 hours, and I would say that they averaged roughly 1.5 hours each one. And of course, they were taped and then transcribed. I was doing all of the transcribing, but then I developed compassion fatigue, so I had to employ the services of a professional transcriber who could transcribe the work. The interviews, I beg your pardon. Ethical considerations are very important in any study, but especially so when you are working with vulnerable populations. We do not want to cause harm, and we have to have appropriate safeguards in place to ensure emotional, psychological, and spiritual safety and well-being. So I went through the University of Sydney Human Ethics Research Committee. I was given approval. You can see some of the protocols that I had in place listed on the screen. Interestingly, none of the co-researchers actually had or brought a support person with them. No co-researcher withdrew from the study. Everybody wanted to actually be heard and to have their story recorded. So we're going to now have a look at some of the stories. Now, I'm sorry that I cannot have everyone's story here, and basically what we're going to be seeing really is just a snapshot of some of the aspects of the experiences. So I've highlighted on the slides, I've highlighted or included, say the first paragraph will be the after-death contact, and then the impact of that in the third or the last little paragraph. So here we're meeting Richard, and Richard, when he experienced his after-death contact, was standing at crossroads in his life, and he was having to make a very difficult decision. He was a priest, and he was considering leaving the brotherhood. And he had this experience when he was shaving, where he saw his mother in the mirror. And as a result of that, he felt encouraged and supported in his decision. And he made the decision to leave the priesthood, and he embarked upon a completely different life. And his mother coming to him was instrumental in him making that decision. Teresa and her family experienced multiple after-death contact with Teresa's father and Teresa's Uncle Joe. And I've just put a few here. What was one of the remarkable things about Teresa's story was that her niece and nephew both had a dream of their grandfather. They had exactly the same dream on exactly the same night, and they reported it to Teresa in the morning. It really was quite astonishing. And that's the other thing that we often see with after-death contact, is that, you know, several members of the family can experience after-death contact from the person who has passed on. And as Teresa said, based on everything that happened, and again, this is just a snapshot, but she said, based on everything that has happened, if she wasn't a believer, she is now. Jane was a very interesting lady. She is a clinical psychologist, and she told me that while she had people report this to her in their sessions with her, she didn't really, she just thought, oh, well, that's just something that happens. But when it happened to her, everything changed, and she experienced what we sort of term as tactile, where she actually literally ran into her husband in the dark. And she had several other experiences, but I wanted to include that, or this one, because it was just so astonishing. And she, again, was an extremely no nonsense, down to earth sort of person. So for her to have something like this was really transformative. And she makes an interesting point, because she says science can't explain everything, and it can't, it can't measure, although perhaps some would argue about this fact, but it can't measure these experiences. But she also says, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen, or that it's not real. I think that's a very important thing to take out of this. John found it very difficult to talk about his experiences, and we actually conducted our interview via the telephone. I feel the reason it was so hard for John to talk about his experiences were because they were so intimate and they were so personal. And he was crying on the phone when he was sharing his experiences of his wife. And he was another very down-to-earth, rather gruff man, very much a, that sort of gendered stereotype, very manly man. And he just completely broke down and was sobbing. But he also said to me that he was so grateful to be able to talk about his experiences with someone who understood. And he said, and I've included it in here, he said, Michele, death's not the end of it. And I think that is something that we take away from these experiences. That's what they're educating us about, that death is not the end of it. Death changes how we exist, but it doesn't mean that we don't exist. Michele, again, experienced multiple types of after-death contact. Her husband, Percy, was a musician, and in the room where he would give lessons, there was a metronome. Now, the metronome had run down and had not been wound up. And on this particular occasion, she heard a ticking in the room, and she walked into the room, and the metronome, you know, the little sort of lever was, you know, tick, 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 tick. And she said, you know, it stopped her in her tracks. And she told me that she'd put on, well, you can see she'd put on one of Percy's CDs, and the ticking stopped. And she also had an experience where she saw her husband in the shopping mall. And now I've also had this experience, although for me it occurred on the campus, and I chased my husband, you know, all over the campus, eventually going into, running into an office only to find an astonished professor sitting at a desk, looking quite alarmed because I just burst into his room. But back to Michele. But she had, you know, other experiences as well. And she also makes a really important point. She says that she sees the body as a suit of clothes. So something that we, you know, we live in, something that we inhabit, but there's more to us. You know, in her words, there's our soul, there's our feelings, our spirit, our being, and that doesn't die. Jennifer had multiple experiences, and actually during the interview, a lot of very strange things happened. In fact, with quite a few of the interviews, the deceased made themselves known. That's another story. With Jennifer, she was also standing at crossroads and having to make decisions regarding her professional career, and she had a very, very strong dream visitation. You know, these are dreams that are more than a dream, where we feel that we have tangibly engaged with the person, that we have been somewhere else with them, and they guide us or tell us something. Well, that's what happened with Jennifer. And she says, or she raises something else, which is that she feels that she's been helped and assisted. And a lot of the co-researchers said this. They said that they feel that the people who have died are actually still a part of their life, that they are still somehow aware of what is happening in their lives, and that they are watching over them, and that just because they've died, you know, we, the embodied, are not forgotten. We are not forgotten. And these experiences reinforce that. They provide enormous comfort on account.
Michele, just to keep you oriented, you have a total of 8 minutes left.
Right.
We do have a couple of questions so far.
All right. Okay. Well, look, I might just click through these slides. There's not that many left. Can I just say I can make this PowerPoint available to anyone, and I have references as well, which I've also included. So this was Gary. This was Jill. Jill had a visitation dream from her husband, Bob. Bob had a tactile experience, as did other members of his family, of his granddaughter who was in the Navy, who was traveling home on shore leave and who was killed on the way home. Trudy and her family experienced multiple experiences as well. Katrina and her 18-month-old son both experienced a range of phenomena. Findings. I think for everyone, the after-death contact was profound. For those who were already familiar with it, it affirmed their experiences. For those who had never even thought about themselves as anything other than, you know, a physical person, they'd never even thought about the afterlife, it was life-changing. It really was. So some of the findings I've included here. Obviously, I won't read through this. And again, as I just said, I can make this available for anybody who wants it. But essentially, what after-death contact teaches us is that it maintains bonds. You know, when someone dies, yes, they don't exist as they do here, but they are still alive, just in a different form. So the bonds that we have are maintained. I believe that after-death contact is very much a metaphorical, spiritual idea of transformation and evolution. And I also see that it has a systems relationship with inner life. I think one of the most important of these findings is that it offers hope, and that resonates very strongly with me. It's very hard sometimes to have hope, especially when someone has died that has been such a huge part of your life, and you can feel a sense of hopelessness, and you don't know how you're ever going to survive or get through life without them. And knowing that they are there, knowing that they can reach out to us, knowing that they can send signs, knowing that they are aware of us, knowing that they have not forgotten us, that can get you through, I believe, anything. Thank you.